You get two for the price of one for this presentation. Is that coming out? Can you hear? Oh, that sounds better now. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be invited to come and present here. I think you know about you'll have all heard about this particular crime. It certainly was a nice change for us to go from dealing with firearms and drugs jobs to something a little bit more interesting and an insight into your very interesting antiquarian world. So I was the senior investigating officer for the investigation, but I didn't come into it until after a few months, and David first will speak, and he was the investigating officer from the start.
Hello. So again, it's a privilege to be here to present this to you and to hopefully give you an insight into our world. Over the last 5 years, this Operation Furton, which is what it was known to be called for us as an investigative team, started in 2017. And this presentation is a whistle-stop tour because it's a 5-year investigation, which we've got to condense into 20 minutes. So we will try our best. Right, so without further ado. So, as is often the case, and as we've talked about today, about books needing to travel and export licenses and couriers, these particular books that were targeted by the organised crime group eventually found themselves at Frontier Forwarding Warehouse, which is in Feltham, which is in West London, if you're not familiar. The warehouse was a facility to forward those books to the California Book Fair in 2017. On the 29th of February into the 30th of January, 29th of January into the 30th of January, staff closed the warehouse as usual, and on Monday the 30th, staff returned to find that the books were missing. And what had transpired to be a very sophisticated burglary by an organised crime team. So the books, they belong to 3 victims, a gentleman from Germany and 2 collectors from Italy. The books were, they had obviously various titles and authors, and as you can see, Copernicus, Da Vinci and Isaac Newton. For us, being lay people in the book world, these were obviously culturally quite significant, and obviously at 2.5 million, quite valuable. So, as a detective constable, I was in the office and I heard of this theft by my superiors, and they basically said, this needs a little bit of love and care and attention because this is quite a high-profile theft. I decided that I would take this investigation on, and at that time I was with the Hounslow Crime Squad. And with any investigation, the beginnings of which, it's all about the basics. So it was about doing CCTV trawls, collecting eyewitness accounts, talking to the victims, talking to the owners, and establishing the facts of how the books came to be and how they could have possibly been taken. So following an investigation, initial investigation and CCTV trawl, we managed to identify this McGann and these individuals that were dropped off just before the evening of 9 p.m. on that evening. They were in the site for quite some time, about 5 hours, and they left via the roof. They also entered via the roof, which is where the Mission Impossible side of it came out. They'd clambered up a drain pipe, cut holes into the roof, and then lowered themselves down by a rope, which is not an insignificant undertaking given how heavy these books are, as you all are aware. And they took 244.
244.
So yeah, it was they must have been very Herculean task. So the inquiries quickly led us to these 2 gentlemen, Narcis Popescu and Trine Daniel Mahulka. They were insured to the vehicles that had been used in the initial theft of the books. And using automatic number plate recognition, we were able to track where they went from the initial offence to where they were storing them. And an emerging picture began to unfold because they were both Romanian, so therefore we initially thought we might have a Romanian crime group on our hands. Again, we narrowed down where they were storing them. CCTV inquiries managed to determine that they'd used a series of holdalls, bags, to transfer the books to and from the cars to their premises. And the images are a bit blurry, but I promise you there are suspects up there with bags. So once we'd identified Narcis Popescu, and obviously identifying the fact he was a Romanian national, the next step was to look at his travel and his international links and any co-travellers that he'd travelled into the UK with. And it became apparent that he had booked flights for these gentlemen. That would be Cristian Ungureanu, Daniel David, and Victor Aparic. And this is basically our burglary team. We determined that this was the team that had undertaken the offence, and it showed lots of communication between them in the period that they were in the UK. Phones also placed them within the offence location. So we're overlaying the vehicles and their phones, we were able to determine that this was the group. Further analysis of the communication enabled us to identify this gentleman who was in charge of a courier company in Romania, and his business was essentially to drive goods and people from the UK and Romania to and from, and he would take your order. And the group had strong links to this gentleman. So it was our belief that this gentleman, Mario Mamaliga, had actually arranged to transport the books out of the UK to God knows where. Also of interest was this gentleman. He also flew into the country, and he was the brother of one of the OCG. Interestingly, he did work for a subcontractor for DHL in Germany, and it also just happened to be that he lives in the same town where the books were transported through. We were never able to make a complete link between the two, but there is suggestion that the intelligence around the books was provided by Ilie Ungureanu. And then we've got the kingpin in the bottom left, Gavril Popinchuk and his brother, who we believe were the masterminds behind this offence. The burglary team made numerous calls to him whilst they were on site, going through the books, basically. So I've got CCTV of them going through the books. They make a phone call to Mr. Popinchuk, and obviously discussing what they're going to take and what they're not going to take. Apologies. So, as a detective on a local borough in London, I was at a bit of a loss. The gang had, I felt like I'd identified the gang, but they'd travelled out of the UK, and I believed the books had gone with them. So, in March of 2017, Chief Prosecutor Madam Albu, who was the lead investigator or the lead prosecutor in Romania, received information from a source, which is basically someone who phoned her up and basically said, I've got some information about this book burglary in England. She took the information, and then she tasked Chief Superintendent Tiberius Manea to make contact with me. We shared information, and it became clear that what the information that they were getting was marrying up with what I already knew. And therefore, it was clear that we needed to work together to form a joint investigation team, which is the framework with which European nations could work together, legal framework that we can work together to exchange information and evidence. Following on from that, as a result of the JIT being established, the investigation was tasked to Andy's team, who much more experienced than I, specialist roles, they have surveillance capability, and I'll hand over to him so he can talk about that.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so it was then the Met's a big beast. We've got a lot of different departments, a lot of different specialities, and I was running a specialist crime group that dealt with international organised crime as one of the elements. as I say, normally it's trafficking drugs or trafficking guns. That's our bread and butter. But the principles are exactly the same in books or other stolen property. It's either in or out of the country for financial gain. So the investigation was elevated to my unit, and luckily I was able to bring David with the investigation. David had done a lot of the initial investigation work, and was crucial to sort of smooth transition of the investigation, which was good. So we had a really good idea of. We knew it was an organised group, an organised gang, and as soon as we started talking to the Romanians, the Romanian National Police, they weren't aware of all of these individuals, but they were aware of some of them, and they were aware that they were linked to a very high-profile gang within Romania, which is the Clamparo gang, which is like a mafia-style gang in Romania. So we knew we were dealing with a sort of highly organised setup, and we needed to readdress really what our operational priorities were at that point in time. Some other information that came from our Romanian colleagues was that another element of this crime group had previously stolen Van Gogh painting, and when they believed that law enforcement were closing in on them around that particular item, the information is that painting was destroyed to remove the evidence to keep them in the clear, in effect. So we very early in our investigation had, as our primary objective, was to remain completely covert to this crime group, so that they were completely unaware of that, and hopefully we wouldn't have the same problem again with these 244 books that had been stolen. So that it poses its own difficulties, because especially when we've got suspects, we want to be able to go in, interview them, seize their devices, maybe recover the stolen items, if they've still got hold of them. And that would have been quite dangerous before we had a full understanding, really, of who we were dealing with, where the books might be, so that we could maximise our chances of recovering the books. So instead, we went through stages of covert action. If we move on, David. So with our joint investigation protocol in place with the Romanians, we were able to do surveillance in both countries. It soon transpired that this group were, in effect, commuting to not just the UK, but other countries within Europe to conduct theft-related, high-value burglaries. They can do quite a lot of research using Google Satellite and Google Street View before even arriving in a country. But they were clearly doing this for a long period of time. And as soon as we sort of deployed our resources, we were able to identify other individuals. You can see, sorry, on the page before, top picture, that's Mohammed Enos, who becomes relevant. He was a sort of handler within the UK. And addresses that they were utilising, they weren't linked to, but they had addresses in London and elsewhere. So that was the same in Romania. They're doing surveillance was conducted by the Romanian National Police there for us, and by working together, although we couldn't have 24/7 coverage of them over here, because again it's the sort of proportionality of the crime of the crimes that they were dealing with. We were able to target a gentleman that David highlighted, Mamaliga, who was the sort of transport. He would go drive to and from Romania to the UK once a week, regularly. As soon as he got back, he'd have a night's sleep, and then he'd take the next lot of people or property or goods to and fro. And we were able to effect stops of Mr. Mamaliga when he was going back into Romania, and that recovered identified some stolen property from other offences that had been conducted in the UK, and that Mr. Enos had produced false documents in relation to those items. So it's a demonstration. We can't go into all the details of the investigation, but we were able, through the sort of covert surveillance, to identify other members of the OCGs, the addresses that they were controlling, the methods. Everybody had a role. We had the burglary team that would actually go in, but straight after, those books were handed on to other elements of the OCG, who were then involved in the security and transportation of those items, and then whatever happened to them afterwards. But we were starting to piece together exactly what the group were, what their roles were, and maybe where the books were. As we carry on, so it was quite soon apparent as well that there were significant links to Italy. A couple of the victims were from Italy. Books had been viewed, etc., over in Italy before being transported across. Also, several members of the crime group had either addresses in Italy or had been travelling to Italy and quite close to really where these books emanated from. So there were significant lines of inquiry there that we had to bottom out to find out whether or not these books had been stolen to order, whether they, or whether or not they had ended up in Italy. So we engaged with the Carabinieri, the Italian Carabinieri unit for the protection of cultural heritage in Italy, who were fantastic as well and gave us every support straight away. And they joined the JIT, which was the first JIT between Italy and the UK. So another great development. So from all of the investigations across those three countries now that was going on, we were able to gain evidence against 13 different gang members for 12 offences, of which the Feltham heist is number 2, down the bottom there. And as I said before, they were literally commuting into the UK, conducting these offences and taking the property, or most of the property, outside of the UK.
Okay.
Over to you, David.
Thanks. So obviously, as you can see, we're already collaborating with 2 other nations, the Romanians and the Italians, which was very integral to the success of the overall operation. But that wouldn't have been possible without Europol and ILAB, in fact, because obviously we were liaising quite closely. We were looking for stolen registers, getting them listed, getting the word out there, and I think it was already pretty well known amongst you that these books had been taken in the manner that they had. So Europol was the vehicle that we used to facilitate all of this sort of bilateral cooperation, and it culminated in with an executive action, we call it. So a day or a series of days where we decide this is it. We're gonna go through doors. We're gonna arrest people. We're gonna search addresses. And what we did was we used the operations centre at Europol for that, which enabled us to be able to coordinate them so they happened all at the same time. There's over 70 house searches across Romania, the United Kingdom, Italy and Germany, in order to try and locate these books. We arrested all of the suspects that we had identified, except for one, Christian Ngurianu, who managed to evade capture. He's since been arrested and is now in prison. But at the time, without that sort of coordination and cooperation, we wouldn't have been able to have successfully arrested all of those subjects. We did seize key evidence during these searches. I mentioned the bags earlier. So 2 years later, these bags are found at one of the suspects' addresses. So it is, before it's all kind of theoretical. You're talking about phones, you're talking about vehicles, you're talking about travelling, you're talking about very theoretical sort of pieces of evidence. But when you've actually got hard evidence linking them to that offence and puts him there, and this is in a village in Romania, there's absolutely no reason why this bag should be there. It's kind of irrefutable. So, however, we still had no trace of the books. We hadn't found any of the books in any of the searches that we had conducted.
So we were very disappointed that we didn't recover the books on the day, but we had a bit of hope, as you say, because of the bag. We didn't give up hope. There's still a lot of intelligence gathering opportunities that we were doing covertly, most of which we can't talk about legally in this country. We were in another country, so invite us abroad next time for your next. As a result, we managed to get some information. We were able to get an international letter of request across the Romanians, who were able to go back to one of the addresses that was searched as part of that 70 that we'd done simultaneously. But at that point in time, they hadn't looked under the garage concrete floor. I don't know why not. We would have done that over in this country. And the video here will show you this is the moment they've identified that there's a void, basically in the middle of this garage, and they've had to go and hire that equipment.
Just a quick bit of anecdotal information. The Romanian police later told us in a subsequent debrief they believed the guy who was with the jackhammer was possibly the guy who also concreted the books.
But so the guy is gone now, but the person that was actually inside the hole there, that was Chief Superintendent Tiberius Mania, who was the gentleman that phoned David literally days after the investigation. So he had stayed with it from a Romanian side, and it was a great moment. He certainly phoned me from when he was down in that hole with the first book in his hand. So great moment that happened. And if you are ever thinking of storing your books underground in a garage, the wheelie bin worked quite well, but they didn't quite fit into the 2 wheelie bins they had in there, and there were some books that were in a cloth suitcase, in effect in bubble wrap, and that doesn't unfortunately preserve your books very well.
So following on from that, the recovery of the books. I remember when Andy called me, I was in Putney High Street in London. I was very excited. It was a very pinch yourself moment. Couldn't believe it. I'd been working on this job for years. And then we had the issue of actually storing the books safely and making sure that they didn't deteriorate from this, what would be otherwise actually quite good conditions, as it turns out. So we consulted with the British Library, experts from the British Library. I think we even contacted ILAB. We obviously spoke to the victims, who actually were the best people to talk to because they know the best way to look after their own books. And with cooperation with the Romanian National Library, who very kindly stored them and looked after them and basically, catalogued them for us. We were able to travel over there with to Romania and return the books to the rightful owners, which they're extraordinarily happy. I mean, some of them, this was their entire collection, which they had lost. So, as you can probably sympathise with, is a very emotional moment for them.
Fantastic moment, and it was during COVID, so it was even to get into Romania, we had to get permission from a cabinet member within Romania for everybody to be allowed into the country. So it was quite a challenge. But the moment, we've grown to understand a little bit about the love you can have for a particular book and the history of that particular book. It was a great moment to see that actually these books that we had recovered were the right ones.
That would have been unlucky.
And that they were in relatively good condition, so that was good. So the final thing from our point of view, we're all about locking up the bad people. So here they are. That's the mugshot gallery. In the end, there's the strength of the evidence of the case, and that's really from people like David doing the grunt investigation work. They all pleaded guilty. So although we started a trial, again, disrupted by COVID, once it was disrupted, they all pleaded guilty because they'd seen the strength of the evidence. And they were sentenced to just over 100 years. So it was a very nice ending. And we'll leave you with the 4 books that remain outstanding. So they're on the register, and if you find them, please give me a call.
And we're 4 minutes over.
Sorry, thank you very much.